Welcome to the Samurai Kaizen Technical English Course Deep Dive. We're going to be exploring the future of food, how engineering is transforming agriculture and nutrition.
Yes, and we'll be using English that's perfect for B1 learners like you so everyone can follow along.
Get ready for some pretty mind-blowing innovations as we dive into how engineers are tackling the challenge of feeding a growing world.
Especially with things like climate change and limited resources.
Yeah, it's a massive challenge, but luckily we have some great sources to guide us.
One of them is a report called The Future of Food, and it really highlights the urgency of finding sustainable solutions.
Because the world's population keeps growing,
Right.
but the resources to produce food just don't grow at the same rate.
Exactly.
Okay, so where do engineers come into all of this?
Well, engineers are finding some really creative ways to address these challenges.
So what are we going to be looking at today in this deep dive?
We're going to explore 4 key areas: reducing food waste, vertical farming, sustainable protein alternatives, and even growing meat in a lab.
Lab-grown meat, I definitely want to hear more about that.
It's pretty fascinating stuff.
But first, let's talk about this food waste issue. The report says we waste a ridiculous amount of food globally.
A ridiculous amount, about 1.3 billion tons every single year.
It's hard to even imagine that much food going to waste.
It's not just the food itself either. We have to think about all the resources that go into producing that food.
The water, the energy, the labor, all of it wasted.
So are there people trying to find solutions to reduce this waste?
Yes, definitely. There's a company called Appeal Sciences, and they've developed these edible coatings for produce.
Edible coatings.
They're made from plants, and they can double the shelf life of fruits and vegetables.
So things like avocados and strawberries would stay fresh twice as long.
Exactly. Think about what that means for supermarkets.
And for us at home.
Less food gets thrown away, and we save money.
It's a win-win. And is it just this Appeal Sciences doing this type of work?
Not at all. Even artificial intelligence is being used to fight food waste.
Well, AI for food. There are startups using sensors and AI to keep track of how fresh food is in real time. One example is a company called Wasteless.
What do?
They've developed a system that changes prices dynamically. So as food gets closer to its expiration date, the price goes down.
So people are more likely to buy it because it's cheaper.
Exactly.
That's smart.
Yeah.
And are there any other creative solutions being used?
Some countries are actually turning food waste into a valuable resource.
Like what?
Sweden, for example, they're using food waste to create biogas.
Biogas.
It's a type of fuel that you get when organic matter decomposes.
So they're making fuel from old food.
And then they use that biogas to power public buses.
Wow. That's incredible.
It's a great example of what's called a circular economy.
Turning waste into something useful.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it's not just governments and companies tackling this problem. There are apps you can use to get involved, too.
Yeah, like Too Good To Go.
Exactly. It connects people with businesses that have extra food at the end of the day, so you can buy it at a discount.
I love that app. It's a great way to reduce food waste and try new places to eat.
It is.
Okay, so we've covered some pretty innovative ways to reduce food waste. But what about actually growing enough food, especially with limited space and resources?
That's where vertical farming comes in.
Vertical farming.
Yeah. It's basically taking farming indoors and upwards. Imagine crops growing in stacked layers.
Like a high-rise building for plants.
Exactly. And they don't even need soil.
What? No soil. How does that work?
They use techniques like hydroponics and aeroponics, where the plants get their nutrients from water or mist.
So it's like creating this perfect, controlled environment for the plants.
And they use LED lighting so the plants can get enough light even though they're indoors.
Okay, so what are the benefits of growing food this way?
Well, one of the biggest is space efficiency. Vertical farms can produce way more food per square meter compared to traditional farms.
How much more?
Up to 10 times more food in the same space.
That's amazing. What else?
They also use less water, up to 95% less.
Wow. Any other advantages?
Since they're indoors, they can grow food all year round no matter the weather.
No droughts or floods to worry about.
Yeah.
Are there actual vertical farms operating right now?
Oh, yeah. There's Plenty Unlimited, and they grow greens for Walmart using vertical farming.
Wow, that's big.
And then there's InFarm. They're putting vertical farms right inside grocery stores.
So you could be buying produce from a vertical farm without even realizing it.
It's possible.
Vertical farming sounds like it has so much potential, but are there any downsides?
Well, one challenge is the energy use. All those LED lights need quite a bit of electricity,
That's a good point.
but many vertical farms are incorporating renewable energy to help with that.
Like solar panels.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
all about finding that balance.
So it seems like vertical farming has a lot of potential for the future of food production. But now I want to talk about something else that's piqued my interest. Alternative protein sources. Why are these becoming so important?
Well, the way we produce meat right now through traditional livestock farming, it has a pretty big impact on the environment. It uses a lot of land, water, and energy.
And I'm guessing it contributes to greenhouse gas emissions too.
It's a major contributor. Actually, livestock farming is responsible for more greenhouse gas emissions than all transportation combined.
More than all the cars and trucks and planes in the world?
Uh-huh.
I had no idea. So what are the alternatives to eating meat?
One option is plant-based meat. You've probably seen plant-based burgers in stores. Companies like Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat are doing some really innovative things.
I've actually tried the Impossible Burger, and it was surprisingly good.
The technology has come a long way.
What about its impact on the environment?
Plant-based meat is way more sustainable. It uses far less land, water, and energy compared to producing beef.
So are there other alternatives out there?
Another interesting one is insect protein.
Insects.
They may not sound appetizing to everyone, but they're very nutritious and sustainable.
I'm not sure I'm ready to trade my steak for a plate of crickets just yet.
I understand it's a big change.
So what's the biggest challenge in getting people to accept these new ways of getting protein?
I think there are some cultural barriers, especially in Western countries, around eating insects. But in other parts of the world, it's totally normal.
So it's more about changing perceptions than anything else.
Yeah, I think so. And then with plant-based meat, one of the challenges is getting the taste and texture exactly right.
It has to be convincing.
Exactly. And of course, the price needs to be competitive too.
Makes sense. Okay, enough teasing. Let's talk about this lab-grown meat. They can actually grow meat in a lab.
It sounds like science fiction, but it's real.
So how do they do it?
It starts with taking a small sample of animal cells, usually from a cow or chicken.
Then
They grow those cells in a controlled environment, a special container called a bioreactor.
a bioreactor.
It's kind of like a high-tech incubator that gives the cells everything they need to grow and multiply.
And then eventually, those cells form muscle tissue, which becomes the meat.
Exactly. It's amazing what they can do these days.
So is anyone actually producing this lab-grown meat?
There are companies like Eat Just that are already selling lab-grown chicken.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. What are the benefits of lab-grown meat compared to traditional meat?
One of the big ones is the environmental impact. Studies suggest that lab-grown meat could significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions, possibly by as much as 90% compared to traditional livestock farming.
90%, that's huge.
It also uses a lot less land and water.
Okay, that makes sense. What about animal welfare?
That's another big advantage. We wouldn't need to raise and slaughter animals for food.
So this lab-grown meat could be a game changer, huh?
It has the potential, but there are still challenges.
Like what?
One is the cost. It's still pretty expensive to produce lab-grown meat.
So it's not something we'll see at the grocery store anytime soon.
Not at an affordable price, at least not yet. And then there's public perception. Some people are hesitant about eating meat grown in a lab.
I guess it sounds a bit strange when you first hear about it.
Some people even use the term Frankenmeat to express their skepticism.
Frankenmeat. I can see why that wouldn't be appealing. But if it's safe, sustainable, and tastes good,
Yeah.
I think I'd be open to trying it.
I think a lot of people feel that way.
So lab-grown meat is definitely an interesting area to watch. But all these innovations we've talked about, they might not be accessible to everyone.
That's right. Especially in developing countries where they might not have the same resources or technology.
So how can we make sure that everyone benefits from these advancements in food production?
That's a really important question, and it's one we'll explore more in the next part of our deep dive. We'll be looking at how technology can be used to help developing countries create a more sustainable and equitable food system.
That sounds fascinating. I'm looking forward to learning more about that. Welcome back to our deep dive into the future of food. Last time, we were talking about some incredible innovations, things like vertical farming and lab-grown meat.
Really cutting-edge stuff.
But we ended on a really important question. How can we make sure that these advancements benefit everyone?
Especially in developing countries.
Exactly. They might not have access to the same resources and technology as more developed nations.
Right. It's not just about having these high-tech solutions. We need to find ways to make them work in different contexts.
So what are some of the ways we can use technology to empower farmers and improve food security in developing countries?
Well, one area with a lot of potential is what we could call precision agriculture elite.
Precision agriculture lead, what's that?
It's about giving farmers access to information and tools that can help them make better decisions.
Without overwhelming them with complicated technology.
Exactly.
So how do we do that?
Mobile apps are playing a big role.
Mobile apps for farming. That's interesting. What kind of information can these apps provide?
Well, imagine a farmer in a remote village who can now get weather forecasts on their phone,
Okay.
or pest alerts, even market prices,
All on their phone.
all in the palm of their hand. This can help them make better decisions about when to plant, how to manage their crops, where to sell their produce.
That's amazing. It's like having an agricultural expert in their pocket.
Exactly. And there are already apps like this being used.
Oh yeah? Like what?
There's Farm Crowdy in Nigeria.
What does it do?
It connects farmers with information, resources, and funding opportunities.
So it's not just about information. It's about
Yeah.
giving them the support they need to succeed.
Right.
Are there other simple but effective technologies that can make a difference?
Definitely. Drip irrigation, a great example.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that.
It delivers water directly to the roots of plants.
So it saves water.
A lot of water compared to traditional methods. And it's relatively inexpensive and easy to install.
Okay, that makes sense. What about technologies that are a bit more advanced, but still practical for developing countries?
There are a lot of interesting developments in what's called intermediate technologies.
Intermediate technologies.
These are solutions that bridge the gap between basic tools and high-tech systems. One example is solar-powered water pumps.
For irrigation.
Exactly. There's a company called Some Culture in Kenya that's providing farmers with these pumps.
So they're not relying on expensive and polluting diesel pumps anymore.
Right. And solar dryers are another great example. They help preserve fruits and vegetables,
So less food goes to waste after harvest.
which is a big problem in many developing countries.
Are there other technologies focused on helping farmers grow more food?
There are innovations like biodegradable seed coatings.
Seed coatings, what do those do?
They can protect seeds from pests and diseases,
So the plants are healthier.
and they need less chemical pesticides.
That's good for the environment.
Yeah.
And probably safer for the people handling them, too.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about all these exciting technologies, but access is just one part of the equation, right?
Of course.
How do we make sure that farmers in developing countries can afford these technologies?
And that they know how to use them effectively.
Ex-
That's where collaboration comes in. We need governments, NGOs, companies, research institutions all working together.
To make sure these technologies are accessible and affordable.
Right. One approach that I think is really promising is open source technology.
Open source, like what we see with software.
Similar idea. It's about making designs and blueprints freely available
So anyone can use them.
and adapt them to their local context.
Are there any organizations doing this for agriculture?
The Open Agriculture Initiative at MIT is a good example.
What are they working on?
They're developing open source platforms for agriculture, things like hydroponic systems, solar dryers.
So anyone can download these plans and build them.
Exactly. It's a way to democratize access to these technologies.
That's really cool. It's not just about technology transfer from developed countries to developing countries. It's about empowering communities to create their own solutions.
Exactly.
Are there examples of sustainable solutions that are particularly well suited for developing nations? Things that go beyond just applying technology?
One approach that's really gaining traction is agroforestry.
Agroforestry, I'm not familiar with that.
It's a traditional practice that involves integrating trees with crops and livestock.
So you're combining agriculture and forestry.
Exactly. The trees can provide shade, improve soil fertility, protect crops from wind, even offer another source of income.
Through fruit and nut production.
Right. It's a more holistic approach to agriculture.
Are there any examples of agroforestry in action?
In Malawi, farmers are planting a special type of tree called Federbia albida alongside their maize crops.
What's special about that tree?
It's a nitrogen-fixing tree. It naturally fertilizes the soil.
So it helps the maize grow better.
Exactly. And they've seen a significant increase in maize yields in areas where they've planted these trees.
That's really impressive. What other solutions are being explored?
Remember we talked about insect farming earlier?
Yeah, the crickets and mealworms.
Well, it has a lot of potential in developing countries, too.
Because insects are a good source of protein.
and other nutrients, and they require far fewer resources than traditional livestock.
Right. And in many parts of the world, people are already eating insects regularly.
Exactly. And there are organizations working to help farmers in developing countries set up insect farms.
So they can produce food for their communities and even export it.
Right.
What about vertical farming? Does that have any potential in developing countries?
The high-tech vertical farms we see in developed countries might not be feasible everywhere, but there's a growing movement toward what's called community-led vertical farming.
So they're adapting the technology.
They're using local materials like bamboo or recycled materials.
Then what are they growing?
They focus on fast-growing, nutrient-dense crops that are more adaptable to different climates.
Makes sense. Any other examples you want to highlight?
One more is biogas production from waste.
Right, like those buses running on biogas in Sweden.
Exactly. You can use organic waste to produce biogas, which can then be used for cooking, heating, and even generating electricity.
And it's a renewable energy source.
And the leftover material is a great fertilizer.
So you're addressing multiple problems at once. That's fantastic.
There are successful biogas programs in countries like Nepal,
Where they've installed biogas plants across the country.
and it's really made a difference. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of really innovative solutions, but I know that putting these ideas into practice in developing countries is not always easy.
What are some of the biggest challenges?
Well, the cost of technology can still be a barrier, even with low-cost options. And then there's infrastructure.
Like access to electricity.
Exactly. And internet connectivity, transportation networks, these things can limit what's possible.
Make sense?
Anything else?
Education is key. Farmers need training to learn how to operate and maintain these new technologies.
It's not just about giving them the tools. They need the knowledge and skills to use them effectively.
Right.
So where do we go from here? How do we create a more sustainable and equitable food system, especially in developing countries?
I think we need to focus on what's called frugal innovation.
Frugal innovation. It's about finding solutions that are simple, scalable, and cost-effective.
So we can implement them even in places with limited resources.
Exactly. And we can't forget about the importance of local knowledge.
Traditional farming practices have a lot to offer.
Absolutely. It's about finding ways to blend traditional wisdom with modern technology.
To create a more resilient and adaptable system.
Right. And finally, I think it's important to remember that this is a global challenge that requires global cooperation.
We need to work together to support developing countries in their efforts to build more sustainable food systems.
Exactly. It's about recognizing our shared responsibility and working together to ensure that everyone has access to nutritious and affordable food.
And that we're doing it in a way that protects the environment for future generations.
That's what it's all about.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've covered so much ground in this series, talking about everything from reducing food waste to even growing meat in labs. It's pretty amazing stuff, right?
It is. We've really just scratched the surface of what's possible.
So with all these advancements happening, what are some of the key things you think our listeners should remember? What's the big picture here?
I think the most important takeaway is that there's no single solution to creating a sustainable food system.
It's not like we're going to find this one magical answer that fixes everything.
Exactly. We need a combination of approaches, new technologies, old wisdom, policy changes, and even changes in consumer behavior.
Well, it's a pretty complex challenge.
It is, but it's also an exciting time to be working in this field. There's so much innovation happening.
Well, speaking of innovation, what are some of the most promising trends you're seeing? What is you feeling optimistic about the future of food?
One trend that I find really exciting is the rise of personalized nutrition.
Personalized nutrition.
Yeah, with all the advancements in genetics and data analysis, we're moving towards a future where our diets can be tailored to our individual needs.
So you're talking about getting dietary recommendations that are based on your DNA.
Exactly. Imagine knowing exactly what types of food and how much you should eat.
Based on your genes and your health goals.
And even your gut microbiome.
Wow, that's like having a personal nutritionist with you all the time.
It's pretty incredible.
Are there companies already doing this kind of thing?
There are, yeah. Companies like Nutrigenomics offer DNA testing for personalized dietary advice. And there are others like Habit and Day 2 that analyze your gut microbiome to create a customized nutrition plan.
It sounds pretty futuristic. Any other trends you're keeping an eye on?
Another one that I think is really important is the focus on transparency in the food supply chain.
People wanting to know where their food comes from.
Exactly, how it was produced, what impact it had on the environment.
I can definitely relate to that.
And technology is playing a big role in this. Blockchain, for example, is being used to track food products from the farm to the table.
Blockchain, isn't that what they use for Bitcoin and stuff?
Yeah, but it can be used for so much more. In the food industry, it's like a digital record keeper.
So it's keeping track of where the food has been.
Exactly. It creates this secure and transparent record of the journey
So if I buy a tomato at the store, I could see where it was grown.
and how it was transported and all sorts of other information.
That's amazing. It really puts the power in the hands of the consumer.
It does.
So we've talked about a lot of really positive developments, but there are still challenges, right?
Oh, of course.
What are some of the things that are still holding us back from a truly sustainable and equitable food system,
Well, food waste continues to be a massive challenge.
even with all the efforts to reduce it?
Even with all that, it's still a huge problem.
So what more can we do?
We need to improve infrastructure for storage and transportation, educate consumers, and find ways to repurpose food that would otherwise be wasted.
It's a complex problem that needs a multi-pronged approach. What about opportunities? Where do you see the biggest potential for positive change in the future of food?
I think one of the most significant opportunities lies in empowering smallholder farmers.
Especially those in developing countries?
They are the backbone of so much of the world's food production.
So how do we empower them?
By investing in education and training programs, ensuring they have access to financing, providing them with essential inputs, and helping them adopt appropriate technologies.
So it's about creating a more supportive environment where they can thrive.
Exactly. We need to make sure that they have the tools and resources they need to succeed.
It's not just about increasing food production. It's about doing it in a way that benefits everyone.
Right, and doing it in a way that protects the environment for future generations.
Well said. Any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important thing to remember is that the future of food is not predetermined. We have the power to shape it through our choices and actions.
It's a call to action for all of us.
It is. So try new things, support sustainable practices, and get involved in creating a more just and delicious food system for all.
This has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Thank you for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. We hope you've enjoyed this exploration of the future of food and that you'll continue to be curious and engaged with this vital topic.